Welcome to 10 Conversations for 10 Years, a series of discussions to celebrate 10 years of applying quality improvement to all that we do at East London NHS Foundation Trust in service of delivering our mission to improve the quality of life for the people we serve. Through these discussions, we'll be sharing lessons that we've learned over the last decade, as well as looking ahead to see what the next 10 years might hold in the field of healthcare improvement. We are focusing on the topic of infrastructure for improvement. My name is Amar. I'm the Chief Quality Officer at East London Foundation Trust, and I'm joined by Pedro Delgado, Vice President at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, who've been strategic partners to ELFT for the duration of our improvement journey. Hi, Pedro, and welcome.
Hi, Amar, and thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Pedro Delgado, Vice President at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, and it's exciting to be with you for this third episode, and it's exciting to be joined by very special people who have been part of this journey, some from the very start, others more recently, and nevertheless, just a wealth of knowledge and wisdom and humility in what they have done and what they bring to this conversation. And we're excited to address today the topic of infrastructure. I know Amar will complement, but we know and have espoused for years in this pursuit of whole systems quality and embedding improvement across organizations. The formula, there's no perfect formulas for anything in life, but the formula of structure plus processes equals outcomes, and perhaps even structure plus processes plus culture equals outcomes. So for the infrastructure conversation today, we want to reflect on where things started, what have some of the lessons been, and perhaps even where we are and where things are going.
Thanks, Pedro. And I'm delighted to be joined today by three guests who've been part of the journey at East London for the last decade. Auzewell Chitewe, Katherine, Brittin, and Gill. Thank you so much for joining us today. I wonder whether we could start off by just exploring a little bit about what we actually mean when we use the words infrastructure for improvement. It feels like a really technical, structural thing. What do we, Oz, do you want to perhaps start us off and help us understand what we mean by this and why we think it's important in this work?
So usually when we talk about the infrastructure for improvement, it's the support structures that exist, that we create to nurture and enable a system to improve at scale. As we've been doing this work and speaking to others who are on different parts of the journey, it's something we all focus on. What do we need to have in place to enable people in the system to improve the system, not just at a service level, but at scale? It includes things like, how we motivate people and, unleash their own agency to do this work, how we build skills around doing improvement work, how we enable people to find time for improvement, and just creating the right support structures around teams and around individuals to do this work, whether it's staff, service users at all levels of an organization, including partners in the places where people receive and deliver services, and then really trying to align all of that to everyday work and the priorities of the leadership.
Thanks, Oz. Katherine, do you want to help us understand a little bit about what sorts of things we should be thinking about if we were looking to design the right kind of infrastructure to enable what Oz was just describing? What sorts of components might there be to that?
To really help us build that culture and environment to enable improvement that can be owned locally and by people who are affected by the issues is really, really important. And there's an element of thinking about the capability of people. Are we able to offer them and provide them with the basic skills to enable them to be part of an improvement effort? And also, I think there's a very strong component around leadership and the support for enabling the capacity of staff and involving our service users to build this environment where people can get directly involved in improving what matters to them. The leadership component, I think, is really about identifying, those those people locally that are keen and willing to do that, and providing that permission and that support and what they need to get involved with what's required. And then there's the practical issues as well around: do we have a place to come and share the work that we do? Do we have opportunities for people to get together? Do they actually have protected time to enable them to actually spend time on working towards what needs to be improved within their areas, so that they're directly involved?
Does that resonate, Pedro, with what you see around the world? Katherine talking about the skills people need, but also ways to make sure people with lived experience, the end users, the patients, the family members, have a way to also contribute and be part of the improvement effort, and some spaces where people can come together and learn and share and connect. I mean, how does that resonate with what you see around the world when people are designing systems to support improvement at scale?
The first part of that, Amar and Katherine, resonates hugely. The second is probably one of the unique characteristics of ELFT in relation to truly involving and partnering with service users. I don't think if we took a kind of cross-sectional set of conversations with organizations that are trying to embed improvement, that you'd find as a commonality or as part of normal practice to engage and partner with service users in the way that you all have, with the level of intentionality that you have from developing their improvement skills, so that they're not just passive participants of improvement efforts and they're engaged, but also including the kind of activation of their voice, their agency, and their kind of equal participation on improvement work, and even developing their skills to lead projects. So I think that's pretty unique about ELFT, and it triggers a question for me around why, perhaps since we kind of see a number of systems across the world and don't see this as common practice, what makes ELFT different? What drove you to engage service users in the way that you have on these improvement efforts?
Well, I think it's simply, Pedro, because if you aren't involving the people that are closest to the issues, it's futile. It's a waste of time. How would you get the information? How would you be able to would you be able to work together to enable to make any improvements if we're not involving the people who are directly affected by the issues that we have? They have the most authentic voice. We're so lucky elsewhere. We've created an infrastructure to enable service users to be able to work with us, and we support staff as part of these training offerings that we have at ELFT. We support staff to help them to understand why it's important and how they practically can do that. So the service user voice is so important in making sure we're getting it right, that we're making adjustments, and we're actually focusing on things that really matter to them, that's the core of what they care about, and aligning that with our strategic priorities as well. They're perfectly complemented, because our service users want exactly the same thing as us: high quality care at the right time, when they need it, and in an environment that's safe and demonstrates equity as well for them. So it is a wonderful space to work in, that we have this combination of improvement and people participation working together to enable improvement within our environment.
Yeah, and I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago that said that within the next couple of decades, I think 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people will work for the NHS, at least in the UK. And I think that's how quality improvement is different in healthcare compared to other industries, because the same services that we work in and we're trying to improve are the same services we ourselves use. So I think it's actually thinking ahead and actually being able to focus on engaging service users from the outset, because we ourselves are users of services and have a perspective. So I think it's great that we're able to put that front and center in the work that we do to partner with the people who use our services, who interact with them, and who come to us wanting better outcomes for themselves and working together towards that.
Thanks, Oz. Thanks, Katherine. Tim, I wonder whether you might be able to give us a little bit of insight about how the infrastructure that ELFT has developed has changed over time. A lot of people might be listening to this and wondering, well, we don't have a great infrastructure, so how are we supposed to do this work? Because surely a lot of that takes capacity and people to build and to support. But actually, you were there right at the beginning when we began this journey, and it was literally me and you. I mean, there was no other infrastructure for this. So, what have you seen over time about the way in which we've developed and adapted our infrastructure?
Yeah, thanks. I guess going back to the key term infrastructure, it is about building structures, and building anything takes some time, and it takes commitment and planning, and it doesn't happen overnight. So I think that's something I've been part of. I guess it's recognizing we've had what we might call infrastructure for improvement formally for 10 years, but we are building upon foundations and structures that already existed within ELFT, such as people participation, and there were improvement leaders in the organisation that were able to use their stories to inspire others to build further sort of foundations and structure to the work we're doing. So I think, like, as we did ourselves and would advise anyone else, you've got to start somewhere fairly small, kind of build a bit of confidence and faith around what you're trying to achieve, and bring people with you, and just try evolve as you go, really, and gain confidence, and bring more people to the work. So, thinking back over the 10 years, it literally has been waves of improvement, as we call it, with people being more and more people being trained, and that kind of adds momentum to what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Tim. One of the things I remember we had a realization about, maybe a year into beginning this work, was that no matter how big or skilled a central team could be, and obviously we had a very small team at that stage, it was unlikely to be enough or close enough to the work to really be helpful for teams. And so the design that we went with was one where people had really close access to skilled improvement support. And that was the birth of the improvement coaching program and the system of coaching, which means that you don't have to reach very far for someone who in your local area who can help and support you with this work. I just wonder, Oz, whether you might help us see what's the utility of having that kind of system, because it is different to having just thinking about infrastructure as just being a corporate or central body of people with expertise. How important is having a distributed network of support like we have for people participation?
I think one thing we learned very quickly was people were keen to do improvement work. The amount of people who were attending the training, the number of projects that we're starting, we quickly saw that people were keen to improve their services, and having a method and an approach that we use across the organization was really helpful. It was an enabler for people. So what we knew was, for people to do improvement work, they needed a team. But that team would need some kind of wraparound support around it. And this has evolved over time. But what we've learned is you need a core project team, a few people from the service or the area where improvement is trying to happen, which includes people who understand the system really well, people who use the system maybe as service users or patients or carers. But also having someone senior enough who can champion the work, but also who can help them to test out new innovative ways of working and give them the permission to do that. Alongside that, they also need some kind of infrastructure within the areas where they work. We call these QI forums. So based on the directorate where you work, which are usually divided by geography or by speciality, a place where people come together and share the improvement work that they're doing and coordinate some of that improvement work as well within those directorates. A place where you can talk about improvement work and get ideas and get advice and tell stories about how the improvement work is going. The other things around this team, the wraparound support, included, as you mentioned, Amar, having an improvement coach. Because when we started off, we only had 2 to 3 improvement advisors who are in the central team. and working across 11 to 13 directorates, we realized that you couldn't have just that small number of people supporting each and every project. So building this community of improvement coaches, people who are trained in improvement, but also who are trained to the level where they can support others doing improvement, where they can support 2 to 3 projects within their directorates. This really helps teams doing improvement to have some specialist support around them to help them navigate the improvement journey. And of course, right at the heart of this is the support from service users and from the central team. But we also saw the need to have resources that people could access at any given time. So that's how our QI website, we call it the QI microsite, was born. This was new for us, particularly at ELFT, because instead of sitting behind a wall on an intranet, it was publicly available, which meant that as a team were working on their improvement work, anything that they'd learned in class, if at the point where they wanted to apply it to their improvement work, they could just go on the microsite and get a quick refresher, get some tools, get some templates to allow them to do that. So that infrastructure has been really important to enable teams to do really meaningful improvement work.
It makes me think about John Cotter and what he wrote about innovation and almost needing a second operating system. Healthcare's got really great and strong command and control structures, hierarchical, pyramidal structures for cascading information up and down. But what you're suggesting is that, for teams that are really trying to test new ideas and innovating, they might need something different, which has that wraparound support. That's really interesting. I just wanted, Pedro, you want to come in with some thoughts and questions?
The 3 things that I think you've highlighted are people, so the centralized team, the distributed teams across directorates and so on, and the partnership with service users. Number 2 is skills. So what kind of skills people acquire, and you can start to generate fluency and a common language and so on. Number 3 is what you called resources also. So, and the website being one of them, the microsite, which was both internal and externally, was open to the world. And in that sense, I think in the beauty of the NHS that we all love, free at the point of care, from cradle to grave and so on, we have a challenge that we face continuously, which is bureaucracy. In a 1.4 million people organization, inevitably, you have to have some mechanisms of bureaucracy to assess requests and so on. And I remember, Tim, when you got the microsite started, it was rather agile in the way that you did it. And it was rather reasonable in terms of the costings. And it was rather, let's get it up and running, as opposed to wait for a year until we get every piece of paper signed. So can you reflect briefly on some of that agility, why and how it came about?
I mean, I guess it was a bit of a project in its, it was PDSA in action, wasn't it? Just starting small and iterating. But just speaking personally, coming from having a little bit of experience with websites, I knew that it was very achievable to build a simple website quite easily. And I think talking about bureaucracy, I guess what we were trying to do was a bit different, and we maybe noticed a few barriers potentially from the comms team and the different sort of different hoops that might need to be jumped through to go through a typical process. So we just thought, let's just start small with a web page that just introduced QI to the organization. And I think the key term for me, a lot of stuff we're talking about, is in the things being accessible, the infrastructure being accessible. And I think Oz's point, and we were very deliberate about, this website couldn't be an intranet page that was locked away somewhere that only staff could see, and only when they were on a trust connected computer and not out and about. We're working in more of an agile way these days than we were 10 years ago, but people need information at their fingertips. And so just using a website design from WordPress sort of enabled websites to be customized in a variety of different formats, and therefore accessible to all beyond ELFT as well, because I think we recognised that by being more public and transparent and inclusive with what we were doing, we're likely to bring interest and like-minded people to QI and to ELFT. And then gradually, as the work evolved, we were able to include more stories and engage our organisation. And it grew and grew and grew, and very, very proud to. It became quite, and still is, a sort of world accessed by others around the world, really. And so, yeah, it's lovely to be involved in it.
I think that's really quite a humble way of describing it, Tim. I think if you remember when we initially thought about a website, the communications team said it would take 6 months and £20,000, and you build it in 4 weeks for £300. And it surpasses the number of views that our trust website gets. And I think there's a message in there that if we want to improve, we've got to have the freedom to do things differently and faster. Not necessarily better, but we've got to be able to move and learn faster in a more agile way. You've mentioned the word stories. It's come up quite a lot. And I just wondered, Pedro, whether we could spend a minute thinking about what infrastructure you need to really get connected with the impact of this work and be able to tell that, because that feels like it's been an important part of the focus around building an infrastructure. Katherine, do you want to say a little bit about how's that developed over time?
The storytelling has been a real journey, and of course, the people who do this best are our service users and our staff who are directly affected. And we have, as the department, we have enabled people to be able to share those stories. And I would just like to say, with regard to the microsite, those stories engaged me in my role in South Africa, where I worked in a low resource setting that had no resources. So those stories were engaging to enable me to be able to utilize the resources that we have for anybody globally. So it's really important. And we also really help teams think about how they celebrate their work, because the only way to really influence further improvement is for people to understand and hear successful stories. And what I mean by success is stories that demonstrate learning. So not specifically results based. We've achieved this, but actually, what was the learning throughout these stories? So it's a hugely important vehicle in order to share the work that's going on around the trust, not only with the trust, but with our partners, and of course, to me previously globally.
I have a question again, going back to the stories and the memories and the word agility and the freedom to build and do. One of the tensions that people doing this work face or encounter, and it's a tension within our hearts, I think, in terms of leadership, and it's a tension within the bureaucracy of organizations and the hierarchical organizational chart of organizations, is the tension between centralized support and distributed support. So there is a tendency for us to want to maybe keep power, and there's an opportunity for us to share power, and there's an opportunity for us to cede power. And I sense that in the transition over the years from, let's say Richard Amar and James having been trained as improvement advisors, with the chief medical officer being a senior sponsor and the CEO being quite supportive, things wouldn't have gone much farther with just 3 people and a supportive leadership structure. In a way, the choice of decentralizing it and distributing the power, the resources, the wraparound support that Katherine and also alluded to, I think has been a really important feature of ELFT. So the centralized support is almost a layer over the layer that is more local. So people have accessibility, which is something that Tim alluded to. Can you reflect briefly on kind of what drove you to decentralize the infrastructure? Because that's, again, not the case everywhere. In some organizations, there's a tendency to keep it central. So we'll provide the support from a central office, and that has its limitations. So decentralizing is a choice, but it is a choice. So some people choose to take it and some people don't. Can you reflect on kind of why decentralizing made sense for you and why it continues to make sense at this stage?
We also learned this lesson very early on, because when we started our improvement program, the advice we got from the IHI, right at the start of our journey, was pick a few really important areas to focus your initial improvement work on. So you build that degree of belief in improvement work, and we took what we know to be the ELFT way, which is we took the advice, but did something slightly different with it. So the first few training programs that we ran, we provided the training, but we said to people, apply improvement to what matters most to you. So there was no direction to say, here are the areas to focus in on. What was really interesting was the themes that people decided to work on were the things that were really important to the organization. And I'm glad we learned that lesson very early on in our journey, because it's been reinforced over time, which is actually when people come to work at ELFT, when people receive services in ELFT and they want to participate in improving them, they're going to focus on the things that are really important. And that's what's important to the board and to anyone else in the organization. I remember, I think I was on wave 2 of our initial QI training at ELFT. And I remember colleagues on that program were applying the method to themselves, to their own healthcare and their well-being, things like that. But once they knew how to apply the method, the next project that they focused on was more complex. Something that was, that needed to bring a team around it, something that really mattered to the service that they were in. So it's always having that long-term view that if we create the enablers, people are going to focus on what matters most. And we had a campaign as well very early on, which was the Breaking the Rules campaign. Part of it was, how do we release time for people to focus on improvement, but also what things get in the way. So I think little things like that really help people to see that across the organization, across the leadership at all levels, there's a real intent and transparency to say, work on what matters, and you'll get the support that you need to do that.
Thanks, Oz. I really enjoy that quote. I think it really demonstrates ELFT's journey really well. The common term of we had 1,000 flowers blooming, and there was just work going on all over the place. And now we take a more cultivated tulip approach. So now it's much more strategic, and we've got these fields of tulips of these sort of well-defined and supported improvement pieces of work that are going on, that of course when that infrastructure is around work, then it's much more likely to succeed. And I thought it was a really nice analogy of where we've come from and where we're going to. The other thing I reflect on as well is that question we ask people when they come into the trust. So the minute they come into ELFT, and part of their induction is you have 2 jobs. You have your current job, and the other job is to improve the area that you have. So that message they hear very quickly. And we also invite them to think about, what does quality improvement mean to you? And we're very clear that it's not a department. It's within them. It's an intrinsic way of being. It's a mindset. And coming to ELFT, it was mentioned earlier that common language, and I think we do that particularly well. Certainly the best I've ever experienced in my career, where we really think about how we demonstrate and how we support improvement, and it's consistent and it's a common, easy, simple language. And I've really appreciated that at ELFT, the model for improvement, those wonderful questions, so simple, so easy, PDF-based cycles, really easy as well for people to understand and apply. Previously, we were looking at, it was taking over 200 days for people to come into the trust to actually experience quality improvement training. And now we actually are enabling that within the first 3 months of people coming into ELFT. So very quickly, they're getting the message that you can be involved in improvement, you can do it locally, and you will have the skills to enable you to do that. It's really, really empowering for people, I think.
I think it's been a wonderful exploration of the topic of infrastructure. Thank you, Oz, Katherine, and Tim, so much for sharing some of your reflections and your learnings with Pedro and I. I think what I'm taking away, Pedro, I'll be interested in your takeaway messages. One is, I think your conceptualization of really thinking about people. How do we activate the intrinsic motivation of people and give them the agency they need to be able to make change happen? That's a really important component here. Storytelling's critical, but so is the wraparound support that teams have. Something about the skills people need. And it's still the case that most people come into the healthcare workforce without the skills they need to improve the system. And so we have to build that. And then I think resources you've talked about is, what's available to us to help us. And we've talked about the digital data systems, the learning systems, Life QI, but also the spaces and the knowledge that we can gain from different places. I think that's a really nice way to sort of conceptualize the infrastructure. I'm taking away 2 key points. One about accessibility, making sure whatever you design is easy to access because people don't have time to go searching, and we don't want to put barriers in the way for improvement. And I think the other thing I'm hearing is the way in which this has developed has been based on what we've learned works and doesn't work. So really staying close to the where the work is happening and understanding what's working and what's not working and adapting to it over time, because I don't think we would have been able to design or even describe 10 years ago what we have now. It's evolved. Your takeaway thoughts from this conversation?
Yeah, I think you summarized it brilliantly, Amar. My takeaway is mostly about the human side of things, and I would say the demeanor of Katherine, Oz, and Tim are characteristic of the ongoing learning that is part of the DNA at ELFT in improvement and in everything that you do as an organization. And I think that's an important message in the context of infrastructure, whereas the technicality of training people, of having the website and so on is important. I think the demeanor of curiosity, of humility, and of having a learning spirit is as important. And without those two complementing each other, the technical stuff and the human side of curiosity, humility, and continuous learning, we are doomed to be less successful than what we could be. So that's what I'm taking away. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I've really gotten a strong sense of the spirit within which you walk into your work every day. So thank you for the time that you give every day to making a difference hand in hand with service users and others across ELFT.
So a big thank you, Tim, Oz, Katherine, for joining us for 10 Conversations for 10 years. And I hope you've enjoyed listening or watching, and look forward to seeing you at the next episode. Thanks, everyone.